The bridge of the Silent Blade was quiet except for the soft beeping of navigation equipment. Captain Reed stood at the main viewport, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the stars streak by. The stolen military-grade engines hummed smoothly, carrying his ship through the darkness of space. 20 years of piracy had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him this shortcut would save his crew from the Galactic Alliance patrols hunting them. "Captain, we're picking up some kind of markers ahead," First Officer Thompson reported from his station. The younger man's fingers danced across the holographic display, bringing up visual feeds of what looked like old warning buoys drifting in space. Their surfaces were covered in unfamiliar symbols that glowed with a faint blue light. Reed walked over to Thompson's station, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor. "Run them through the translator," he ordered, studying the strange markings. The ship's AI struggled with the symbols, displaying only fragments of words, danger and restricted among them. "Probably leftover warnings from the resource wars," Reed said, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "Half the galaxy is littered with those things. Maintain course." The Silent Blade pushed forward, its crew of 48 experienced pirates, confident in their ship's capabilities. They had good reason to be. Their vessel was equipped with stolen Galactic Alliance military technology, including shield systems that could withstand heavy fire and weapons that could cripple ships twice their size. "More markers, sir," Thompson announced as they passed the 2-hour mark. "They're getting denser. The design is different from anything in our database." Reed frowned, studying the new set of buoys. These ones were sleeker, their construction more refined. The symbols on them were sharp and precise, arranged in patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their complexity. The ship's eye translator displayed an error message, unable to process the language. "Sir," the sensor operator, Martinez, called out from her station. "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from these markers. They're communicating with each other." Reed felt a slight tremor of unease, but pushed it aside. His crew had escaped from Galactic Alliance dreadnoughts and raided heavily defended corporate worlds. A few mysterious buoys weren't going to change their course. "Plot a course between them," he ordered. "Keep our shields at maximum, just in case they're mined." The Silent Blade threaded its way through the field of warning markers, its advanced sensors scanning for threats. The ship's database, containing information stolen from military and corporate sources across the galaxy, had no record of this sector being claimed by any major power. "Perfect hunting ground," Reed muttered to himself. Unclaimed space meant no patrols, no defense fleets, and best of all, no questions about cargo manifests or registration papers. As they pushed deeper into the mysterious sector, the crew began to notice other oddities. The background radiation was different here, following patterns their sensors couldn't quite analyze. Occasionally, their long-range scanners would pick up flickers of movement, but nothing concrete ever appeared on their screens. "Probably sensor ghosts," Reed assured his increasingly nervous crew. "This region might have some unusual stellar phenomena we haven't seen before. Keep recording everything. We can sell the data to scientists later." The Silent Blade's engines continued to push them forward, deeper into what they assumed was just another unclaimed sector of space. None of them noticed that the warning buoys had stopped trying to communicate with their ship's systems. None of them realized that their presence had already been detected, analyzed, and reported to authorities they didn't know existed. Captain Reed stood at his viewport again, watching new stars come into view. He smiled, imagining the riches they might find in this unexplored region. After 20 years of piracy, he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. 3 hours after passing through the field of warning buoys, the Silent Blade's sensors detected something promising. Near a massive gas giant with swirling purple storms, a collection of structures floated in space. They looked like mining platforms, their frames extending into the planet's upper atmosphere to harvest valuable gases. "Only 4 defense satellites," Thompson reported, his voice eager. "Basic Model 2. probably automated. No military ships in range. He brought up a detailed scan on the main screen, showing what appeared to be a primitive operation by galactic standards. Captain Reed smiled as he studied the readout. How many life signs? 23. Martines answered from her station. Minimal power readings from their shields. They're running on standard fusion reactors. She paused, frowning at her console. Though there's something odd about the energy patterns. Odd how? Reed asked, walking over to look at her readings. They don't quite match known fusion signatures. Maybe it's a new design. Martinez adjusted her sensors, trying to get a clearer reading. There's also some kind of background frequency we can't identify. Reed dismissed her concerns with a wave. Probably interference from the gas giant. Thompson, prepare the boarding teams. Martinez, jam their communications. Let's do this by the book. The silent blade moved closer to the mining facility, its advanced engines running silent. As they approached, Reed noticed something strange. The facility's lights didn't dim when Martinez activated their jamming field. "Sir," Thompson called out, his voice tense. "We're receiving a transmission, but our jamming field is at full power." "Put it through," Reed ordered, wondering how they were breaking through his ship's military-grade jammers. A clear voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect standard galactic. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space. Power down your weapons and withdraw immediately." Reed laughed. "They're trying to bluff us. Send our demands. We want their cargo, access codes, and no heroes." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target their smallest satellite. Show them we mean business." Before the weapons officer could comply, new voices joined the first one, each speaking in a different galactic language. The messages were all the same. "You have entered Sol restricted space. This is your final warning. Leave immediately or face consequences." "Sol," Thompson muttered, checking his star charts. "Never heard of it." "Doesn't matter," Reed said. "Fire the warning shot." A bright beam of energy lanced out from the silent blade, heading straight for the smallest defense satellite. What happened next made everyone on the bridge freeze. The beam hit what looked like empty space 3 kilometers from the satellite, and simply vanished. No explosion, no shield flare, nothing. It was as if their weapon had never fired. "Impossible," the weapons officer whispered. The mining platforms began to change. Sections of their frameworks shifted and transformed, panels sliding away to reveal weapon ports that definitely weren't on any mining facility Reed had ever seen. The defense satellites transformed too, expanding into much larger structures that bristled with technology the pirates didn't recognize. Multiple new contacts. Martinez shouted, her sensors suddenly alive with activity. Ships appearing from everywhere. They're just appearing out of nowhere. Reed stared in shock as vessels materialized around them. They seemed to fade into existence like ghosts becoming solid, their designs unlike anything in their database. Some were small and sleek, others massive and angular, but all of them were now positioned to trap the silent blade in a perfect sphere of overlapping fields of fire. A new voice came through their comms, speaking in a calm, almost amused tone. "Welcome to the Sol system, pirates. You've just made a very serious mistake. Power down your systems immediately, or we will power them down for you. You have 30 seconds to comply." Reed looked at his crew's frightened faces, then back at the screen showing the impossible ships surrounding them. For the first time in 20 years of piracy, Captain Reed realized he might have chosen the wrong target. Captain Reed's 30 seconds were ticking away. His hands gripped the command chair's armrests as he considered his options. The silent blade was surrounded by ships that had appeared from nowhere, but his pride wouldn't let him surrender to a system he'd never heard of. "Engines to full power," he ordered. "Get us out of here." "Sir," Thompson protested, "maybe we should." "Do it," Reed shouted. "Our shields can handle anything they throw at us. We've got military-grade technology." The Silent Blade's engines roared to life, pushing the ship toward what looked like a gap in the enemy formation. The strange ships didn't move to stop them. They didn't fire. They just waited. "Something's wrong," Martine said, staring at her sensor readings. "The engine power, it's dropping." Reed felt it too. The familiar hum of his ship's stolen military drives was changing, becoming uneven. Warning lights flashed across every console on the bridge. "They're doing something to our engines," the engineering officer reported through the ship's comm system. "Some kind of. I don't even know what this is. The power is being drained right out of our systems." Outside the viewport, small objects started appearing around the Silent Blade. They looked like glowing blue spheres, each about the size of a person's fist. Hundreds of them, forming a web around the pirate ship. "Weapons," Reed commanded. "Shoot those things down." The Silent Blade's gun ports opened, but before they could fire, the blue spheres pulsed with light. Every weapon system on the ship went dead. "We've lost all weapon power," the weapons officer reported, his voice shaking. "They didn't even touch us. They just turned everything off." A new message came through their comms. "That was 29 seconds. You chose poorly." The blue spheres pulsed again. This time, the Silent Blade's engines died completely. The ship drifted in space, surrounded by technology that made their stolen military equipment look like children's toys. "Fine," Reed growled. "Fine. We surrender. We'll leave your system and never return." The response was immediate. "That option expired 30 seconds ago. You will now be boarded and taken into custody. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. We suggest you take this time to consider the series of poor decisions that led you here." Through the viewport, Reed watched as one of the larger ships moved closer. Its hull seemed to ripple like water, sections of it morphing and changing shape. A docking tube extended from its side, moving toward the Silent Blade's main airlock. "Sir," Martinez called out, her voice filled with awe and fear. "I'm picking up readings from their ships. The energy levels. This can't be right." "What is it?" Reed asked, dreading the answer. "Their power output. It's higher than a Galactic Alliance battleship. Each of their small ships is producing more energy than our entire vessel at full power. And the big ones," she shook her head. "The sensors can't even measure it." The docking tube reached their airlock with a gentle thud. Through the ship's internal cameras, Reed watched as the airlock cycled open. He expected to see armed troops rushing in. Instead, a single figure stepped aboard. It was a person in what looked like a simple gray uniform. No visible weapons, no heavy armor, just a calm confidence that made Reed's spine tingle with fear. "This is Commander Wilson of the Sol System Defense Force," the figure announced through their comms. "Your ship is now under our control. Your crew will be detained and questioned. Your vessel will be impounded. Welcome to humanity's home system, pirates. You're about to learn why we keep it restricted." As those words echoed through the bridge, Reed finally understood. They hadn't just stumbled into some random systems territory. They had blundered into the home of a species so advanced they didn't even need to show their weapons to win a fight. The age-old warning passed down among space travelers echoed in his mind. "Beware the quiet ones. They're quiet for a reason." Commander Wilson walked onto the Silent Blade's bridge with the calm confidence of someone who had already won. Two floating silver spheres followed behind her, humming softly. The bridge crew stared at them, wondering if they were weapons or simply monitoring devices. Nobody wanted to find out the hard way. "Captain Reed," Wilson said, looking directly at him, "your reputation precedes you. 20 years of piracy, 817 recorded raids, and not a single capture." She smiled slightly. "Until today." Reed stayed in his command chair, trying to maintain some dignity. "You know who I am. Then you know I've escaped from Galactic Alliance dreadnoughts before." "The Galactic Alliance," Wilson said, shaking her head. "They're so proud of their technology. Did you know they once offered to protect our system? They thought we were primitive because we choose to stay isolated. She walked to the viewport, gesturing at the human ships surrounding them. We declined their offer. Through the viewport, Reed watched as more human vessels appeared. They seemed to phase into existence, their hulls reflecting the light of the gas giant's storms. Each one was different, some sleek and small, others massive and geometric. All of them looked more advanced than anything he'd seen in his decades of piracy. "Martinez," Wilson called out, making the sensor officer jump. "Your sensor readings weren't wrong. Each of our patrol ships does indeed produce more power than your entire vessel. Would you like to know how?" Martinez nodded despite herself, curiosity overwhelming her fear. "Zero-point energy extraction," Wilson explained. "Your scientists probably think it's impossible. The Galactic Alliance definitely does. We achieved it 50 years ago." She turned back to Reed. "That's why we stay isolated. We're not interested in sharing our technology with people who might misuse it." Thompson spoke up from his station. "If you're so advanced, why hide? Why not rule the galaxy?" Wilson's laugh was genuine. "Rule the galaxy? Why would we want to do that? Do you have any idea how much paperwork would be involved?" Her expression became serious again. "We're quite happy in our little corner of space. We trade when we want to. We help where we can. And we keep to ourselves. The only time we have problems is when people like you ignore our warnings." One of the floating spheres moved to the center of the bridge, projecting a holographic map of the solar system. Reed saw 9 planets, countless moons, and asteroid belts. Throughout the map, there were pulsing red dots. Each red dot, Wilson explained, is a defense platform. There are 14,327 of them, and those are just the ones we want you to know about. The map zoomed in on their current location. You managed to pass 42 of our warning posts before reaching this station. Each one could have stopped you. We let you continue because we wanted to see what you would do." Reed's face paled. "It was a test. Everything is a test, Captain. The warning buoys tested your judgment. The mining station tested your morality. Your attack tested your wisdom." Wilson shook her head. "You failed all 3. The bridge crew watched in silence as more human ships appeared around them. Some were emerging from what looked like tears in space itself, others simply materializing as if they'd been invisible. "Consider this a learning opportunity," Wilson continued. "The galaxy thinks we're primitives hiding in our little restricted zone. We're fine with that. It's peaceful. But occasionally, we need to remind people why this space is restricted." The holographic map changed, showing their planned route through the system. Reed saw with growing horror that they'd been heading directly toward Earth, humanity's home world. "You want to know how humanity responds to threats?" Wilson asked, her voice carrying steel beneath its calm surface. "You're about to find out. We're taking you to our main judicial station near Mars. On the way, you'll see exactly what you were flying toward. I suspect it will be an educational experience." The floating spheres pulsed once, and Reed felt his command chair's restraints activate. Around the bridge, his crew found themselves similarly secured. "Welcome to Sol Space, pirates," Wilson said. "Class is in session." The silent blade moved through space under external control, its engines dark and silent. Captain Reed watched helplessly as his ship was guided away from the gas giant, escorted by 5 human vessels that seemed to glide through space without any visible propulsion. "You're being quiet, Captain," Commander Wilson observed from where she stood near the navigation console. "No escape attempts. No clever plans." Reed glared at her. "You said our engines were disabled." "They are," Wilson agreed. "But in 20 years of piracy, that's never stopped you before. The records show you once rewired a dead ship's core to explode, just to cover your escape." Before Reed could respond, Martinez called out from her station. "Sir, power's coming back to some systems." Wilson didn't seem concerned. In fact, she smiled. "Ah, right on schedule. Your engineer found the emergency restart sequence." She tapped one of the floating spheres, and it projected a view of the engine room. 3, 2, 1. The Silent Blade's engines roared to life. Reed felt the familiar vibration through his chair as power surged through the ship. His crew's faces lit up with hope. "Full power to engines," Reed shouted. "Get us out of here." The Silent Blade's engines screamed as they pushed to maximum thrust. The ship lurched forward, breaking away from its escort. On the sensors, Reed saw the human ships falling behind. "They're not following," Thompson reported excitedly. "We're actually going to." His words cut off as he saw Commander Wilson. She hadn't moved to stop them. She hadn't even changed her expression. "Interesting choice," she said calmly. "Let's see how far you get." The Silent Blade accelerated away from its escorts, pushing deeper into the solar system. Reed felt a moment of triumph, until he saw what was ahead of them. The space around them came alive. Hidden defense platforms activated, their surfaces shifting like liquid metal as weapon systems emerged. Networks of energy beams crisscrossed their path, not firing at them, but creating a maze of light they had to navigate. Detecting multiple ships approaching from all directions, Martins reported, her voice shaking. They're hurting us." She was right. Every time they tried to turn in a new direction, more human ships would appear, forcing them to change course. The Silent Blade was being guided like a fish in a stream, pushed exactly where the humans wanted it to go. "I should mention," Wilson said casually, still standing perfectly steady despite the ship's violent maneuvers, "that we're currently approaching the Kuiper Belt. Lots of interesting technology out here. Would you like to see some of it in action?" As if on cue, the ship's sensors lit up with warnings. Hundreds of objects were moving in the space around them, too small and fast to track properly. "Those are our cleanup drones," Wilson explained. "They keep the solar system tidy. Normally they just collect space debris, but they have other functions." One of the drones zipped past the viewport, a sleek, silver object no bigger than a human hand. Then another passed, and another. Soon, the Silent Blade was surrounded by a swarm of the tiny machines. "Engineering reports engine power dropping again," Thompson announced. "These things, they're eating our energy emissions." Reed watched in disbelief as his ship's power levels plummeted. The drones weren't attacking them. They were simply absorbing every bit of energy the engines produced, making it impossible to maintain their escape velocity. "The Kuiper Belt is particularly beautiful this time of year," Wilson commented as the Silent Blade's engines finally died again. "Of course, the view of Neptune is even better. That's our next stop." Reed slumped in his chair as the human escort ships caught up with them. "This was never a real escape attempt, was it?" "No," Wilson confirmed, "but it was an excellent demonstration of why it's better to follow instructions the first time." She gestured at the viewport, where Neptune's blue form was becoming visible. "Ready for the next lesson." Neptune's blue surface filled the Silent Blade's viewport, its dark storms swirling beneath layers of clouds. Captain Reed felt the last of his confidence fade as he watched a massive structure emerge from behind the planet. It looked like a ring of silver, at least 10 kilometers across, floating in space. "That," Commander Wilson said, "is Defense Station Neptune, one of our smaller outposts." "Smaller," Thompson whispered in disbelief. Wilson nodded. "Most of our major installations are closer to Earth. This is just a monitoring station." She turned to Reed. "Your ship's power is about to come back online. What you do next will determine how this ends." As if on cue, the Silent Blade's systems hummed back to life. Reed felt control return to his command chair. Around the bridge, his crew regained access to their stations. Reed looked at his weapons officer and nodded. They had one chance. Their ship still had its secret weapon, a prototype quantum torpedo stolen from a military research base. Even humans couldn't be prepared for something that hadn't been invented yet. "Fire everything," Reed commanded. The Silent Blade's weapon ports opened, unleashing every bit of firepower they had. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and finally, the experimental quantum torpedo, all streaking toward the human ships in the station. What happened next made Reed's crew question everything they knew about space combat. A web of golden light appeared in front of the human vessels. Their weapons hit it and simply stopped. The energy beams curved and twisted, forced into spiral patterns like water going down a drain. The plasma torpedoes were caught in invisible fields, their energy drawn out until they faded away. The quantum torpedo, their secret weapon, made it halfway to its target before a small drone intercepted it. The drone pulsed once, and the torpedo transformed into a shower of harmless light. "Interesting weapon," Wilson commented. "Quantum phase technology. We abandoned that line of research 30 years ago. Too unstable." She touched one of her floating spheres. "Would you like to see how we do things?" The human ships moved in perfect formation. They didn't fire any weapons. Instead, rings of blue energy formed between them, creating a network of interconnected fields. "Gravity manipulation," Wilson explained as the silent blade began to shake. "We're creating a localized distortion. Your artificial gravity should fail in 3, 2, 1. The bridge crew felt themselves lift from their seats, held in place only by their safety restraints. Every loose object in the ship began to float. "A simple demonstration," Wilson continued. "We could increase the effect and tear your ship apart, or decrease it and crush you into a space the size of my fist. But that would be uncivilized." Through the viewport, Reed watched more human ships appear. They emerged from what looked like folds in space itself, their hulls gleaming in Neptune's blue light. Each one was different, but they all moved with the same impossible grace. "Sir," Martinez called out, her voice filled with awe. "These energy readings, their smallest ship is producing more power than a Galactic Alliance battle fleet. And that station," she shook her head, "the sensors can't even process what it's doing." Reed looked at his trembling crew, then at the calm human commander. "What are you going to do with us?" "That depends on you," Wilson replied. "You've seen a fraction of what we can do. You understand now why we keep our space restricted. The question is, what have you learned?" The artificial gravity suddenly returned, dropping everyone back into their seats. Through the viewport, Reed could see Earth in the far distance, a small blue dot that somehow managed to produce technology that made the galaxy's greatest powers look primitive. "Take us to your station," Reed said quietly. "We surrender. For real this time." Wilson nodded, satisfied. "A wise choice, Captain. Now, shall we proceed to Mars? The holding cells there are quite comfortable. And the view," she smiled. "Well, you're about to see why we love our solar system so much." The Mars Judicial Station hung in space like a giant silver snowflake, its crystalline arms stretching out for kilometers in every direction. The silent blade looked tiny as it approached, dwarfed by the massive human structure. Through the viewport, Captain Reed could see hundreds of ships moving around the station, each one more advanced than anything in his 20 years of piracy. "Welcome to your new home," Commander Wilson said as their ship was guided into one of the station's docking bays. "At least for the next few months while we process your case." The docking bay itself was a revelation. Instead of the usual mechanical clamps and guide rails, the ship was caught in invisible fields that moved it precisely into position. The walls seemed to flow like liquid metal, forming a perfect seal around the silent blade's airlock. "Your crew will be held in standard quarters," Wilson explained as they prepared to disembark. "We're not barbarians. You'll have comfortable rooms, good food, and even entertainment. The only restriction is your movement." Reed looked at her suspiciously. "You're treating pirates like guests." "Captain," Wilson smiled, "your capture serves a greater purpose. In about 6 hours, news of your arrest will reach the Galactic Alliance. In 2 days, it will spread to every major spacefaring civilization. Your story will teach them all a valuable lesson." As they walked through the station's corridors, Reed and his crew saw wonders they could barely understand. Holograms that looked more real than reality itself. Doors that opened by reading thoughts. Workers using personal gravity controls to walk on walls and ceilings as if it was perfectly normal. They reached a massive observation deck that offered a view of Mars on one side and Earth on the other. The red planet and the blue planet, connected by streams of human ships moving between them. "Look there," Wilson pointed toward Earth. A massive structure was visible in orbit around the planet. "That's our main defense station. It's about the size of your moon. We keep it cloaked most of the time." Martinez gasped. "That's impossible. Something that size would be impossible to hide, would require more power than 100 stars to operate." Wilson finished for her. "Yes, by your science, it would be. That's why we stay isolated. The galaxy isn't ready for some of our solutions." A hologram appeared in the center of the observation deck, showing the Silent Blade's journey through their space. Every warning buoy they'd ignored, every defense platform they triggered, every ship that had tracked them. "You were never in control," Wilson explained. "From the moment you crossed our border, you were part of a carefully managed demonstration. We let you get close enough to see what happens when someone ignores our warnings. The galaxy needs reminded sometimes." Reed watched the replay of their capture, seeing now how completely outmatched they'd been. "Why show us all this? Why not just throw us in a cell?" "Because you're going to tell this story," Wilson said simply. "When you're released, you'll spread the word. Not because we'll ask you to, but because you won't be able to stop thinking about what you've seen." She gestured at the view of Earth. "We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to share our technology. We just want to be left alone with our discoveries, our experiments, and our peaceful corner of space. You're going to help make that happen." Thompson spoke up from where he stood near the window. "Nobody will believe us. This level of technology, it sounds impossible." Wilson's smile widened. "That's the beauty of it. Some will believe you. Some won't, but all of them will wonder. And next time they see those warning buoys at the edge of our space, they'll remember your story. They'll think twice. They'll turn around." She turned to face the entire crew. "That's your real punishment, Captain Reed. You're not just prisoners. You're messengers. Every time you tell this story, every time you warn another ship away from Sol space, you'll be serving your sentence." Reed looked out at the massive defense station orbiting Earth, then at the endless stream of impossible ships moving through space around them. He understood now. The humans hadn't just captured his ship, they'd captured his imagination. And he knew he'd spend the rest of his life trying to explain what he'd seen to anyone who would listen. "Message received," he said quietly. "Loud and clear."